So, the Olympics. Yeah, I know, they're already over, and I certainly won't be the one to cheerily give you a full sports recap because I guess I just don't give a flying fuck if anyone can swim faster than the guy with webbed feet, when in order to build the pool that he's in, tens of thousands of people were violently relocated. Indeed, since 2009, when Rio won the bidding to hold the Games, more than 20,000 families have been evicted from their homes in favelas to make way for arenas and infrastructural projects. And that's just one estimated number. Sports columnist Sally Jenkins reported that 60,000 people have lost their homes to the Rio Games, including residents of Villa Autodromo, possibly the most controversial favela of the Games, as it sits at the edge of Barra de Tijuca, a wealthy suburb, and is slated to be turned into luxury condos after the Games are over. Ultimately, several residents of Autodromo, including those pictured here, refused to be moved, even after intimidation and violence. For example, in one instance, resident Maria de Pena's nose was broken by a city security force as she and some neighbors tried to form a protective cordon in front of her house. Eventually, her home, where she had lived for more than 20 years with her husband, mother, and daughter, was demolished. And she is now one of 20 families living in 20 cottages right outside the gates. A move made unwillingly by the city when they realized that they just couldn't get rid of these last residents. So, might as well house them in small white boxes to try and make it look as natural as possible. But those passing by on their way to this most prestigious of sporting events might not think that a huge sign reading Museum of the Evicted is particularly natural. And for these residents turned activists, that's just the point. To them, the Olympics are nothing more than a destructive force that shoves money in the pockets of few while leaving the many homeless and suffering. A feeble attempt to throw glitter at gross systemic racism, income inequality, and deep-rooted corruption. And while the first Brazilian gold went to a black woman from the City of God favela, this feel-good story is but a passing blip in a sky illuminated by social and political disasters. For example, you may have heard about the suspension of Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff after she was accused of corruption by, as the LA Times pointed out in March, a group of politicians accused of being even more corrupt than she is. In fact, Rousseff is one of only a handful of Brazilian politicians who hasn't ever formally been accused of or investigated for corruption. Meanwhile, 49 out of 81 senators and 303 out of 513 members of the lower house are being investigated for serious crimes of one sort or another. And some sort of another is probably tied to Petrobras. Very long story short, Petrobras is Brazil's national oil company, and as Glenn Greenwald outlined in an interview on Democracy Now! In March, as oil prices increased and as Brazil found huge amounts of oil reserve, it was anticipated that Petrobras would essentially be the engine of Brazil's future economic growth. And it started being drowned, essentially, in profits. They would essentially hire private construction companies to build various platforms and other infrastructure for Petrobras for oil exploration. And they would essentially pay far more than what the contract really called for, and there would then be kickbacks to the head of the construction company, but also to Petrobras and to the politicians who control it, virtually every significant party in Brazil. All that being said, Rousseff's impending impeachment outwardly has nothing to do with the oil company, despite the fact that she was the chairman of Petrobras between 2003 and 2010. In fact, the case against Rousseff stands on incredibly shifty ground, with clear evidence to suggest that the rich, predominantly white factions of Brazil's cream of the crop orchestrated this shit show in order to get rid of her and the Workers' Party, as they were not able to defeat them at the ballot box. Koch brothers, take note. One of the key figures in this hypocrisy game is Michael Temer, the interim president who garnered a plethora of boos as he opened the Olympic Games earlier this month. And for good reason. Within the first 30 days of office, 3 of his chosen ministers were ousted due to corruption, including one who was caught on tape plotting Dilma's impeachment as a way to shut down the ongoing corruption investigation, as well as indicating that Brazil's military, the media, and the courts were all participants in the impeachment plotting. And that's just the tip of a horrendously corrupt iceberg that dives deep past the battle to take down Rousseff, encompassing billions of dollars worth of kickbacks, a severe economic recession, and continued fuckery by the US that dates back to our involvement in the 1964 coup that ousted a left-wing, decidedly non-corrupt government and installed a military dictatorship that disappeared and tortured thousands, Rousseff included. And that's not to say that Rousseff doesn't have skeletons in her closet. Indeed, she seemed very happy to see the Olympic Games forge ahead, even commenting on her sadness at missing the Games, lamenting, "Imagine that you are going to throw a party. You have worked towards it for several years, creating the conditions, placing the lighting, calling the media, and on the day of the party, someone arrives and takes your place and takes over the party." Yeah, see, I don't think that you should be that quick to be that proud of a party that the majority of your country doesn't think you should be having. That's like living in a house full of roommates telling them that you're having a party, and in the process beating the shit out of one of them, tearing down one of their bedrooms before they have a chance to move their shit out of it, and stealing money from basically every one of them because how else can we afford this goddamn party? Indeed. In June, Rio's governor declared it a financial disaster, which opened the door for a $860 million aid package for, you guessed it, Olympic security. Meanwhile, police officers have been staging protests to decry salary delays and poor working conditions, going so far as to organize a protest at an airport, where officers held up a sign in English reading, "Welcome to Hell." Also, meanwhile, teachers and hospitals are suffering from budget shortfalls as well, prompting protests complete with banners and graffiti reading, "Money only for Olympics, no money for public education," and "Fancy transportation, trashy hospitals, what kind of country is that?" Jessica Azevedo, a Rio resident, had this to say to the New York Times: "The amount that was spent on the Olympics could have helped hospitals that are closing. They should have thought about public health and education first. That's where we are suffering." So, Dilma, I guess the general feeling is, if the only way to throw your party for a few is to ruin the lives of many, skip the fucking party. Brazil doesn't need stadiums that are used for less than a month and then turned into million-dollar piles of shit, like this one in Beijing, or these from Athens, where the Olympic Village had been slated for public housing after the Games, but it kind of never happened. Sorry, bad luck. In fact, bad luck, or just plain assholery, just seems to be the MO of the International Olympic Committee. Earlier this year, more than 58,000 trees were bulldozed in Korea to make room for, wait for it, some fucking ski slopes. That will be in service for a grand total of, wait for it again, 3 fucking days. Side note, this was an old-growth forest with many trees ringing in at over 500 years old, but fuck that, we need to watch people slide downhill on sticks. I mean, why is it that in order to showcase athletic prowess, we have to destroy other humans, animals, and the planet? For all the oohing and eyeing over feats of strength, agility, and speed, I think it would make a fuck ton more sense to ship these magnificent specimens of athleticism out to destroyed favelas and have them earn some medals for building houses, or hell, planting trees in Korea, or cleaning the polluted waters of former Olympic town Beijing. That would not only be worth cheering, it might actually make the Olympics worth having. However, as it stands now, it's just a long festival of despair for many, in the name of a short-lived festival of cash and crowds for the few, the greedy, the low-life scum.
You low-life scum.